Thank you all so much for your patience. The speakers are coming in, so I'm going to just give, housekeeping remarks back in. Welcome. Thank you for being here tonight and braving Houston's polar vortex, no less, to celebrate Designing Motherhood on view in its 5th iteration at Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. My name is Sarah Darrow. I'm the curator and exhibitions director here. This multivalent curatorial project, a book, a design syllabus, an Instagram archive, and of course an exhibition right next door in our galleries, demonstrates the immense power of convening, drawing together constellations of objects, stories, artists, and institutions into dialogue. This relational network spirit also inflects the show's methodology. In each city on the show's tour, community thought partners to the exhibition have been essential to citing the conversations about design and the ways in which it facilitates, shapes, makes, or breaks our reproductive experiences in the cities it's traveled to. It has been immensely, overwhelmingly significant to host this project in Houston, Texas. And our Houston community partners showed up. Our community input sessions informed not only the exhibition design and flow of content in the galleries, but it also spawned the wonderful slate of programs in conjunction with this show, including this happy hour and book launch tonight. We are kicking off a weekend of amazing events. Tomorrow morning, we are hosting a doula-led accordion bookmaking workshop. Our speaker is coming to take us centered on recording birth and parenting stories. If you're interested in taking this, find me after this. We have 2 spaces left. On Saturday, please come back for another incredible program at 3 p.m. where we will hear from the full Designing Motherhood curatorial team, Juliana Rowan Barton, Michelle Miller-Fisher, Zoe Greggs, Gabriella Nelson, and Amber Winnick, as well as 3 exhibiting artists, Allison Crony-Moses, Francesca Fuchs, and Jennifer Lindachik. A few housekeeping items. If you'd like to purchase Extreme Pain, Extreme Joy, the Designing Motherhood book, or recent issues of Mother Tongue magazine, they are available in our retail space in the lobby, as well as on that table to the left. Restrooms are located across from the front desk, where you can also get a delicious complimentary So Tall margarita, care of our incredible sponsor, Marfa Spirit Company. If you haven't already, do yourself a favor and have one. It will warm you right up. It's so good. Our most sincere gratitude is also owed to our exhibition sponsors, the Alice Kleberg Foundation, Cause Connect, Scott and Judy Nyquist, and patrons of the Mothership fundraiser. I am so honored to be in orbit with each of you who have traveled near and far to be with us tonight, and I also want to recognize the dire situation going on in Los Angeles right now. I am delighted to now have the opportunity to introduce Designing Motherhood's Houston Center for Contemporary Craft exhibition partner, Natalia Rocklin, the co-founding editor of Mother Tongue, a biannual print magazine and publishing imprint that interrogates and celebrates modern motherhood through inclusive stories about art, sex, pop culture, and politics. And she will be introducing our distinguished speakers. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Hello.
I was told to keep this very close to my mouth. To have all of you in this room amidst this exhibition at this moment in time in Texas to talk about art and birth and womanhood and safety gives me goosebumps. Just the act of gathering in today's world is quite literally a feat and feels like a small act of defiance. And I'm not sure I actually need to explain that much further, other than to say thank you for making the effort and for partaking tonight. That in and of itself is reassuring in this upside-down world. And there's also sort of this element I was saying to Sarah earlier today, that there's something, sort of a metaphor for motherhood and womanhood in this moment, is that it feels sometimes like an uphill battle, but you always find a way to make it work. As some of you have gathered, Maggie Shannon, the fantastic photographer who is at the heart of this project, couldn't make it tonight because she is in Los Angeles. Her home is in Altadena, which was really severely affected by the fires. But I do want to take a moment to offer a bit of context about her and her work before turning it over.
Maggie Shannon is a Los Angeles-based photographer specializing in portrait and documentary work. She tells stories of small communities and their social rituals in order to elevate marginalized voices and build a more inclusive world. Her approach is rooted in honesty, empathy, and curiosity, and her stunning work has appeared in the New York Times, National Geographic, Time, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, and The New Yorker. Her series Extreme Pain, but also Extreme Joy, first ran in the New York Times in 2020. It started as a documentation of midwife-led home births after much of the US went into lockdown during the early pandemic. We had the pleasure of running an unseen edit in the second issue of Mother Tongue in 2022, and we could never quite forget these extraordinary images. Their rawness, their intimacy, their honesty. So when Maggie came to us saying she wanted to publish a book, it put into motion a plan for Mother Tongue to suddenly become a publisher and make the book. And this was our first project. When putting this book together, there was only one name in our minds to write the foreword, to contextualize Maggie's work and this topic more broadly in contemporary culture. And that name, of course, was Angela Garbus. She's the author of Essential Labor, Mothering a Social Change, and Like a Mother, and she's become one of the leading voices of our generation when it comes to conversations about care work, motherhood, and being a woman and a person in the complicated place that is America today. Turn the page. Seeing Maggie and Angela's work and wisdom come together in the book was a pleasure for us at Mother Tongue. And tonight, thanks to Sarah and the HCCC team, we have an opportunity to celebrate it here. And of course, thank you to you, Michelle and March, for swooping in last minute to save the day. You've long been an intellectual crush of mine, so to meet you in person and with baby in hand is really, truly marvelous. Michelle is currently the curator of contemporary decorative arts within the Contemporary Art Department at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and her work focuses on the intersections of people, power, and the material world. Of course, she's also a foundational member of the team behind designing Motherhood, which is next door, as you all know. So now, just thank you for coming, for making the effort, for being here. And over to the two of you. Thank you so much for coming and making it work.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
All right, thank you ever so much. That's wonderful. Thank you for those most generous of introductions. So I have to say, that's an amazing, beautiful outfit. I just got off a plane and I was in the cab for the last hour and a half. So did Angela, but she looks really good. Nobody threw up on themselves on the flight, so I can at least say
That's
that.
great news.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for those amazing introductions. It's so lovely to be with my teammates from Designing Motherhood as well, with you all especially. It's not a very nice night out there, so it's really nice of you all to make it. We wanted to just add a few housekeeping things. First of all was that huge thank you to Sarah, all of her colleagues at HCC, and to Mother Tongue magazine. We're going to keep our conversation pretty short and sweet, actually, in some ways, because I think both of us really want to be in conversation with everybody here in the room. I feel like everybody here has lived experience, stakeholder experience, expertise. The other thing that we did want to say, I know Houston's no stranger to natural disasters, and we are thinking about Maggie a lot tonight. So if you know her, now's the time to text her and say, we're here, we're celebrating your work. If you don't know her, take a picture of this and tag her and say, we're here, we're celebrating your work. Because it's really miserable to be having your work celebrated, but you're not here. So in some way, if you can let her know that, I think it would be really appreciated. However, we have one powerhouse of the two that was meant to be here. Angela, when I was reading the foreword that you made for Maggie's amazing series, and this is not a question, I will go to the list of questions.
That's fine. But we can talk about whatever.
When I was reading the foreword, I was so struck. I was sitting on the plane today and I was thinking, of course, there couldn't have been anybody else to write this and to introduce these photographs, because it's both a book about birth, or it's a series of photographs about birth, and so you're looking at the subject that you were talking about in Like a Mother. But it's also about birth workers, and so it's about that care work that you were talking about in essential labour. So it's this beautiful Venn diagram of those two books that have affected, I think, certainly me, but everybody else in the audience as well. What did you think about when you first saw Maggie's series? We're looking at them behind us, so I can't really gesture to many of them, but what hit you, first of all, when you saw these works?
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you to Natalia and to Melissa from Mother Tongue for inviting me to do it. It was one of the easiest yeses. I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't seen the pictures in this form. I had seen Maggie's late-term abortion photos in, I think it was The New Yorker that published them. So that was my introduction to her work. So that's who I knew her as. So right away, I was already like, I'm already in, because here's someone who clearly sees abortion as on the same spectrum as birth, because it's all reproductive health, and it's all freedom, right, having a body. And so that was, so right away I was very motivated. And then when I looked at these photos, well, one of the things that struck me was that certainly I have seen pictures of women of color giving birth, but I hadn't actually, when I looked at these, that was one of the first things I noticed, right? It's not like, oh, we have a few women represented. I felt like women of color were at the heart of these images. They had an equal, they were just part of what the picture of humanity is. And so right away that struck me. And then there were also these photos, it was both the sort of animal nature of a lot of the photos, which is what birth is, who we are. So it was this very animal, like raw, physical, immediately transportive and evocative. And then there was also just one of the things that stuck with me was the fly paper in one of the images. There's a clock that says, we take life one cup at a time, right? And then, I was really interested in this other photo where there's a woman and her partner, and the partner is wearing his do-rag, and he's like on the side of the bed, and there are satin sheets, and I was like, God, that is a choice, right? So there was like these satin sheets, and there was, I think I thought it was like lip balm or something. There was some sort of, we had to do like a forensic examination of the photo. I think I thought it was a candle.
I really appreciated you did some amazing visual analysis as an art historian. I was like, yes. When you noted the satin sheets, I was like,
Yeah, it was just this total, it was the way that I think we understand the midwifery approach to birth is, and the way that I think, this is a wonderful audience to be in front of. Like, birth is one of the most miraculous, spectacular things you can ever witness or be a part of, and we've all been part of it in some way. It's also the most ordinary thing you can imagine. It's the most basic thing. And so that's what I saw in those photos.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask also for people to be thinking when we get to the conversation part, if you'd seen Maggie's photographs, either the late-term abortion photos or the ones that were in the New York Times that were related to this series, first of all, what your first thoughts were, or indeed if you hadn't seen those images before coming along tonight, what were the photographs of birth that you had seen that are part of your visual lexicon? I remember talking to my sister about giving birth. She gave birth about a year before I did, and she said to me, Michelle, I hadn't really seen pictures of somebody giving birth, and I don't think I still have witnessed it in that way, she said, because she hadn't really necessarily sought them out beforehand either. She said, my partner watching me saw it, but I felt it, and so it's something very different. And I think what I love about these images of Maggie is that they document something that if you've had that experience of giving birth, for me at least, it felt sort of out of body, and definitely it wasn't visual. It was something that was almost interior in a sense. And so the documentation of it, I think, is part of a historical continuum as well. When we look at what we have in the Designing Motherhood exhibition, I'm trying to remember, Sarah, do we have, I'm sorry that I'm asking this, I should also know it, do we have All My Babies in this presentation here, the film?
No, but we have a birth, a film about feelings.
Aha, okay, great. So there's a significant history, obviously, of birth being represented both in film and photography, and Maggie's images, for me, are also part of that historiography of film and photography as well.
Do you mind talking about that a little more? Because as someone who I don't know about the visual history of birth.
Yeah, and I'm not a photography historian by any means, Angela, although almost started as one. But in the checklist that we have for designing motherhood and more broadly, when you think about the history of photographs like this being taken, you might look back to All My Babies, a film from 1953, and we've talked about it a lot on the Designing Motherhood team. It was made by George Stoney, who was really unknown in the 1950s, but came to be known as the father of documentary television. And he was commissioned to create a documentary film, a film that was meant to be a teaching film for the Georgia Department of Public Health. So the state of Georgia commissioned him in the early 50s, and it was meant to show 114 points of what midwives should be doing, how they should be interacting with their clients, how they should be interacting with the burgeoning hospital scene at that point in time. And Maggie's photographs really remind me of that particular film in both positive and sort of ways that give me pause in a sense. George Stoney went and he followed Mary Frances Coley, who was a Georgia-based midwife. He went down early, actually, before filming started, and he basically became her intern or her shadow and followed her and found how respected she was in her community, but also at what an inflection point she was at. In the 1950s, it was at the moment when birth was moving from the home to the hospital. And so in 1900, you were almost 99% likely to have your baby at home, whether you were incredibly well off or not. By the 1950s, it was about 50-50. And so when he went down and followed Mary Frances Coley and followed two births, and you see on film the births occurring, it's very raw, it's very real. These are not actors, these are people who are in their own communities being filmed. He wanted to make an Italian neorealist film, so it's this beautiful black and white imagery. He really sort of caught in amber a moment in time where birth was moving from the home to the hospital, where it was moving out of the purview and the expertise of Black and Indigenous midwives. Mary Frances Coley was an African-American midwife. And he was a white filmmaker, so there was certainly a tension there in terms of what he was showing. But he was able to capture that moment and in some ways offer a critical analysis of it, although we've talked as a team because you can't get past the racial tension that's in those photographs. And so when you think about Maggie's work, I think about that particular film. I think about the Life magazine tradition of looking into people's lives, and there were certainly photographers who looked at midwives, who looked at birth in that context too. And I think Maggie sort of gathers up all of those histories and represents them or reframes them in this moment of crisis in 2020 when people, especially birthing people of color, were trying to find a safer place. And you talk about safety in your essay, a safer place to give birth. And so for me, she does something incredibly beautiful. She doesn't hide the disparity in health outcomes in terms of maternal and infant mortality. That's sort of at the heart of why she's taking these pictures and the heart of why women and these birth workers are thinking about giving birth outside of the hospital. But she is also part of this historical continuum of photography. So very long answer.
No, thank you.
But
I appreciate the context. Yeah,
that was fine. So I guess part of the series is really born from crisis, and so too are your books in a sense, or at least Like a Mother and Essential Labor. Can you talk a little bit more about the way in which you think through safety in the essay that you wrote for Maggie to introduce these images? Like, what was it that you invoked when you talked about safety within this work?
Well, I think that in birth, I have to say that I feel like everyone is sort of like, if you don't think that you might be in crisis while giving birth, whatever the context, like you may live a very privileged existence or you may not be paying enough attention. I think in the context of this country, I think reproductive health is in crisis. So that's, and I think it has been for a long time. I think the fall of Roe was something that, for years we would be like, oh, there's a ruling, and then we all go out into the streets and then we all sort of sit back and wait for the next shoe to drop. And so I think that this has been coming for a long time. I think that to think about safety is really, when I wrote Like a Mother, I was just thinking a lot about how a lot of the stuff that I was concerned with or thinking about, like when I write my birth plan about low intervention, which we just found the other day because we're doing this like home renovation project, and I was like, just burn that thing. It's so not like, it's like, dear.
What did it feel like to reread that?
It felt like seeing like myself as an infant. It was so naive. It was beautiful and pure.
This was for your first?
Yeah, for my first birth. So, but I was thinking about, I'm like writing this birth plan, and my mom's like, what do you need that for? And, especially as coming from a family of immigrants, like my mom and my parents are healthcare workers, but she came here and was like, oh, well, I was raised to be like doctors.
Know everything.
Like doctors are experts and we just do whatever they say.
Yeah.
And she also has a congenital condition, so she had all 3 of her children by C-section. So my mom was like, what do you, like, you just have the birth that you're gonna have. And I was like, okay, and I was like, well, I can't judge her for that. I mean, I think I tried, right? And as the way I tried to judge her for so many things. And then I was like, actually, I don't feel like I have a leg to stand on. Like, safety isn't morality, right? And a lot of what I was trying to do in like a mother was to argue against, like, actually morality doesn't have a place in birth and pregnancy, right? There is no, the way we position everything is like it's good or it's bad, you should do this or you shouldn't do this. And there's no one right or wrong way to do it. There's like a million ways to do it because, not a million, there's infinite ways to do it because there's infinite ways to be a person.
Yeah.
And so when I was thinking about that, like, and then it's only, I think, sort of gone more this way, but what I was consuming were images of like white women in fields, right? Giving birth, or like someone, like literally, I watched a YouTube video of a woman like crouching in a river, and I was like, what? Like, this is.
I also saw that YouTube video.
Yeah, and so I was like, this is wild, right? Like, that is. Like, that's an idea of like, this is safe to one person, like, and I was just really thinking about how what is safe to, like, my mother, again, like, safety to her was, I am in a hospital.
Yeah.
There is, like a surgeon here. There is a team of nurses who I trust, right? Like, if something happens, if the worst were to happen, like, I could be revived, right? And then, I think it's because your hat has fallen in front of your eyes.
It might also be because she's hungry. Does anyone mind if I feed her? There we go. This is the audience.
Oh, this is great. Yeah. I'll talk so not everyone's looking at you all the time. I understand. It's a little bit hard. But so I wanted to think through this idea. I wanted to respect that safety for some people means I want to be in my home. I want to be attended by midwives, right?
Yeah.
I want as little medical intervention, right? But I want to be able to go to the hospital if things. And so I just, this idea, and again, like in a country that does not guarantee healthcare, a human right for everyone, right? In a country that does not guarantee paid leave for families, right? We make a bunch of choices that we tend to assign moral value to that are really just the products of your cultural upbringing and like, how much money you have, like whether you're on Medicaid or you're like in a private insurance.
And also what you see, I think, which is what is so important about Maggie's images. It's what you see. It's what you, and as you say, like you go Googling on YouTube and you find, again, for me, it looked like a very middle class white woman giving birth in a stream. It's a fascinating video, but it's, and there's definitely in the history that we were talking about of history of photographs of birth, there's a dominant person who is featured in those photographs, and it is often white middle-class women. And so I think Maggie's photographs are so very important because they reframe how people might make choices about birth or what is represented in terms of birth and birth workers. Exactly as you were saying, in terms of safety. And that was something I loved in your essay too, Angela, the way that you talked about safety being different based on different personal experiences, different cultural appropriateness, but not on the moral. There being no such thing as a morality of safety. Yeah. I'm trying to think of other questions that I had on the list. Let me take a look. What did we talk about? So, these were made during the pandemic, and you talk in your essay about sometimes feeling like, well, no. You talk about having a moment where you say, well, what is the point? Like, how do I keep going in terms of writing what you write or making what Maggie makes in terms of images. I think we're gathered here tonight because there's a shared consensus that it does matter, and indeed it's changed people's lives. It galvanizes people, it brings people together in community. But you were writing your first book under the shadow of the Trump administration coming in for the first time.
Yeah.
Maggie was making her images, both series, under the shadow of the of Roe v. Wade being rescinded. As a writer and as somebody who uses creativity as a mode of resistance, how do you keep on going? Like, what does galvanize you? And I know it seems like a self-evident question in a way, but I'm always curious about what keeps people moving forward, even as things sometimes feel very hopeless.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, part of it is what's the alternative, right? I think like the idea of being hopeless is a tremendous privilege, right? That is also, I mean, you can shelter yourself for a period of time, but that is an illusion that is quickly going to
shatter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. Like, I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about Luigi and how, you know, I'm not condoning violence, but I think it's really important. I think actually that things have changed and that we need to be talking about like what is being done to women, to birthing people, is structural violence. You know, we have seen the statistics how across America, especially in the South, people are dying of having a miscarriage, and because people are afraid to treat them because of what kind of legal actions might come. So I think we're past, it's crisis, yes, but I actually think that I'm thinking right now about how do we continue to have a conversation that escalates, that turns up the temperature with our language, because we've sort of, I think, also been told we need to protest respectfully and peacefully, and I think that the fact that the sort of universal public reaction to the assassination of a healthcare executive is support, right? Is really telling, right? Like, and I think that's, you know, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about what comes next. Is to get back to the original question, like, I was like, oh, I think we need to be thinking about more property destruction, right? Like, these are the things like that, again, like when you throw away this like conventional morality, when you think about what is being done to people, and everything has been turned up. And so I think it's thinking about that, like the nothing is getting easier. And so I have to say, like, one of the things though, I read, there's a wonderful writer, her book is coming out on Tuesday the 14th. She's based here in Houston. Her name is Bianca Mabute Louie, and she has a book called Unassimilable. And when I was reading it, and she's, you know, it's very much about Asian American identity and how she takes inspiration from her popo who moved here and never learned English. And I was brought up by immigrants who were like, assimilate, assimilate, assimilate. Make yourself as legible as possible to white people, which I have, you know, and then now I'm like, oh, okay, so I can start saying some things that I want to say after I'm aware that I've made it through gatekeeping and I've sort of been approved, right? But her argument, and I felt very seen and held, but deeply challenged by her book, because I was like, oh, I'm old. You know, like I'm 47, and I mean, I have a lot to say and do, and I have like life ahead of me. But I was like, this is a moment where I'm like, oh, I'm going to listen more than I feel like I need to say. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so I was like, yes, she's teaching Asian Americans, which is a political identity that was made up, right? That contains. You could be from one of 53 countries to claim that you're Asian American, and she was like, we need to not be that. We need to not be easily categorized. And I was like, I agree with this. I don't know how to do that. I don't know, like, and so I think like part of what I do is now like, I want to talk about her work, right? I want to talk about how I'm reading this book by Dean Spade, who's a legal scholar and activist. He wrote a book called Mutual Aid, and has another book coming out called Love in a Fucked Up World. And it's kind of a self-help book about relationships for people in movement work. And I was like, oh, I need to be learning more from people who are like, we're going to have to be doing more community safety, community protection, that sort of direct stuff. So I think part of what keeps me going is realizing like, I'm just a part of this. I'm really grateful to go back to that idea of the continuum. I'm surprised. It's wonderful that people see me as someone who has done something that has inspired them or is part of a movement. That's very humbling, and that's great, but like, it kind of has to keep going.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's also realizing, like, you know, I'm working on another book, but I'm challenging myself to not hide behind research and data, which is like, I think that's all very useful, but I know for me personally that it's a way that I have avoided. Probably dealing with things that I need to deal with, and so I'm working on a memoir, and I give myself permission to not be out there with a message politically and like taking up that space, because I think some of that space is better taken up by other people.
I love that, Angela. The last question I was going to ask before we throw it to the audience, you turned on its head there in a really perfect way. I was going to ask, like, on whose shoulders do you feel like you stand, or who are the people who sort of inspire your work in terms of the writing that you have done and you are doing today? I would ask Maggie the same thing, and she would give me a much better answer than I have been able to do for contextualizing her photographs. But I love that you mentioned both Bianca and then Dean's work. I don't know Bianca's. I've worked with Dean some moons ago. They did a wonderful presentation for colleagues of mine on mutual aid within the art world. And you're right, when I work with and listen to folks who are 5, 10, 15, 20 years younger than me, I definitely feel old. I also feel, I come from the UK, and I was always told, like, be polite, be nice, put your point across quietly, gently. Also, like, do that within the context of being feminized or being a woman. And I love it when I am watching these much younger folks. And it's not like they are being rude either. They're just much less, they give much fewer fucks.
Yes.
And so
the truth is clearer. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's starker because folks of our generation and further up haven't managed to solve, and in some cases have made things worse. And so they are inheriting even more knotty problems than we have dealt with.
To like come of age and graduate from college, like this is millennials, like into a time of great economic precarity. Like it was just by a few years, but I kind of dodged that. Right? Like,
I'd say that all of the time I came into my job in 2005, 2006. If it had been 2 years later, Lehman Brothers would have crashed, and it would have been an entirely different experience that people have had over this long decade now, almost like 15 years.
And I feel like in some ways what I want to do is, like, it doesn't mean that I stop doing work. It's just that I work in a different way, or it's like I'm ready to take my place as an elder. You know what I mean? Like, I'm ready to be the auntie who someone brings a plate to, right? Like at a gathering, right? I think that's like I'm happy to age in that way, right? It doesn't mean that I'm conceding my power.
No.
It means I'm using it in a different way, or I'm doing what a lot of boomers can't do, which is like sometimes you just sit down. You know, you just get out of the way, like
mentor, be present.
Yes, exactly.
Like, offer the resources that you have. We should throw it maybe out to the audience, but I wanted anything that you want to say last. If we bring it back to Maggie's amazing photographs, I think the thing that sticks with me about looking at these images, and again, they're behind me, so I'm not looking at them now, but I was looking at them on the plane and looking through the slideshow. We're sitting here at a time when I know Maggie's in Los Angeles, and so many people are being cared for by people who are first responders. And I can't help in that context but be so struck in terms of these images by birth workers. The hands, sometimes, most of the time, they are not in shot. Thinking about that art historical analysis and visual analysis that you so beautifully do in your essay, when I was looking at these, the things that I really found as structuring devices of the images, the compositional frameworks for them, were these gestures of care, whether it was a touch, a hand, somebody present but not sort of the star of the show, the sort of supporting birth workers throughout. That's what really stuck with me. Is there something that you want to give Maggie her flowers for before we open it up to the audience?
This is in the foreword, and really, so I wrote the foreword after I had a conversation with Maggie, and if you read the foreword, I end with Maggie's own words, because I was like, I really can't do anything more than this. But I was very struck because she said, she took these images of people, and she said, photojournalists generally don't do this, but I gave them total control. I sent them all a file with all of their photos, and if they didn't want anything published, I told them that I would pull it, no questions asked. And I was like, I mean, I wasn't surprised, but I was sort of like, that is a very unorthodox way to do things. And I was so moved, you know, like by the sort of confidence that you have in your work, to know that you have taken the shots that matter, to be able to realize like you have collaborated, like that sort of, that idea of that racial tension, right? Of like, to be like, we are on par together. And then the other thing to me about that is just that, like, I was like, wow, if care can be integral, because I think that's what she's doing, is offering care and safety to these people. If care can be integral to an art practice, like that is, I mean, that's what we should be having as like as the linchpin of our culture and society. And so I really think that there's so much power in these images, and also in what she is doing as an artist herself, like in terms of giving that agency on a person-to-person level. So that's what I wanted to shout her out for, you know, especially because she's not here, because she's caring for people in her community right now too.
I love that, Angela. It's a beautiful place to stop. I copied and pasted the last 3 paragraphs of your essay because I loved them so much. And I read them and I read them again while this one was sleeping on the plane. And the very last thing you say, which I thought was so beautiful, can I quote you directly? Is it okay to read it?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. You say, and here my words fall short because no one could say it better than Maggie. I equate safety with love, which I loved. It was beautiful. And so that connection between what you were talking about, safety being personal, being cultural, not being moral, but being part of care and love was just beautiful. So yeah, thank you so much for gifting us this beautiful forward and for framing Maggie's work. And thank you all for listening to us chat a little bit about it. And now we hand over to you all if you have questions, thoughts, or things that you want to share. How many of you knew Maggie's work before coming tonight? Sarah. And did folks see it in the New York Times? What were the things that, what were your reactions when you saw her work? Again, I mean, if we're here to celebrate it, and especially in her absence, it would be really nice to note the things that sort of moved you about it, or the ways in which you came to it. And so if you're willing to put that on record.
Raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you.
Bring the mic. Or even if you hadn't seen it before, something that kind of has struck you as you're looking at them just now.
I have some thoughts. Well, you know, we have this Instagram algorithm that feeds us a lot of pictures of birth. And there is a visual language, like a very accepted visual language, especially at home birth right now. You get the same angles and the same like rose petals in the pool, and a lot of these kind of like romantic shots that look very similar. And these don't look like that.
Yeah.
They're really framed in a way that isn't as, you know, kind of like glamorized and like soft focus as possible.
Yes.
And I was lucky enough to grow up with pictures of home birth. My mom gave birth at home and ran with a crew of midwives. And these photos reminded me of those photos that I grew up with, which were a little bit higgledy-piggledy, a little bit, you know, kind of like about the domestic space as much as about birth. And I love that. I love seeing kind of like the messy toys on a shelf, or like the view out the window, because that's so much part of one's birth experience, is that space, right? It kind of like becomes part of that story. So just I love the break from that visual language and just situating it in a way that's very authentic to the space.
Thank you for sharing that, Amber. I'm so struck, we're looking at these images in the context of a craft center, an art space, and I know that for us getting Designing Motherhood into museums was really, really hard, and it still is. As a curator in a so-called encyclopedic museum, it's still really difficult to get images that are this straightforward of something that touches at least every one of us once in our lives, because we are all born. And so I'm struck with your comment, Amber, about Instagram and the way in which birth is framed for us in very specific ways in these highly mediatized settings. It's also framed for us, or not framed, in terms of the ways in which we might come into cultural institutions and see the photography collection or see other visual arts collections that may or may not show birth in this way. And so it's really nice, Sarah, to be able to have them in the spaces. So thank you for having it. Gabriella, you're going to say something.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hey, March. What I love about these photos are, it evokes a type, I feel like there's a lot of times there feels like there's choice with birth, but it's an illusion for a lot of people. There are choices out there, but they seem out of reach or out of touch, or like they aren't for some people. And these photos remind me that they can be for everyone, and I hope that whoever sees these photos also feels that way. And then understanding or knowing the context behind how the photos were chosen, it makes, I don't know, it feels like there's even more autonomy, there's even more choice. Because in a way, the people that are part of these photos are artists, right? They got to, like, how amazing is that? When I was part of the Designing Motherhood book, I didn't, I took a picture for Instagram. I didn't know it was gonna be in a book, me and my son, and it opened up a world for me. Not just about being in a book, or my mom took the photo and her being credited in the book and being a part of this amazing project, but like, what else is for me that I didn't know could be for me? And so that's what these photos feel like for me. Like, you don't have to have the perfect home. You can have, I don't know, a mousetrap in your crib. You know, that's what you have there. It doesn't have to be perfect. Your hair don't have to be done. You don't have to have the perfect pregnant belly. You don't have to have the perfect partner. You just have to be a human being and be open to the experience. And I think it's really beautiful and touching.
I love that so much, Gabriella.
Yeah. I love that idea, that because that's something that I, not just in birth, but I think as I get older, is that idea. No, but what you just said, which is like, what else is for me that I didn't know could be for me? Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of women can relate to. When you start to claim something, you're like, oh, I can have this. Yeah. I've been allowed to have this whole time.
That is the power of photography. And I mean, if people haven't seen Gabriella's photograph, if you go to the spread on feeding in the Designing Motherhood book, it's this amazing photograph. And it's so true, the power of a photograph here, the power of a photograph there.
It changed
I don't know, how many years later? 6 years later now, and we're still in conversation.
It changed my life. And just knowing that maybe that is the case for some of these people as well, or anybody who's just open to an experience of trying something new, of taking a choice, making a choice that maybe you didn't even think was for you, but just taking a shot.
I think that's a really beautiful way maybe to open it up to more informal and general discussion by concluding the conversation part of it and just joining together. So thank you so much to Sarah again for having us, and to Angela. I came slightly sweaty. Thank you so much for being in
it's funny, I came in and I was like, I walked in just like 10, 15 minutes before you, and I was like, I had an outfit planned. And I was like, Juliana's gonna love this outfit. And then I was like, I'm gonna change in Sarah's office. And then I was like, literally everyone just saw me walk through the door, like, wet, carrying my bags, and I was like, it's all a ruse. Like, we're just gonna come as I was on the plane. Yes,
it could be even tomorrow. Yes. But and so I think so many people here absolutely venerate your work. So thank you for being here with us, and for sharing it with us, and for sharing Maggie's work through your eyes too. So
of course, I mean, my pleasure.
For more conversation.
I know I offered this up for you, but I have offered that we will do a little bit of a book signing so we can keep the conversation going, grab another Sotol margarita, We have books for sale here and in the lobby, and we have some Sharpies on this table. So if you wanna get a book signed, maybe we can make that happen now.
Fantastic. And if you just want to chat, come up and say hi.
You want to share your birth story?
And we have Juliana, Zoe, Gabriella, and Amber, who are part of the curatorial team of 5 for Designing Motherhood. So come say hi. Yeah.
Wait, sorry, I have one more thing to add, and I'm turning the mic on, which is that, so before Natalia possibly sneaks out of here, I really, I was like, I saw a coach, I saw a gathering, but I mean, I think that this idea, she sort of glossed over it, like, oh, and then Mother Tongue became a book publisher.
True.
That's a really big deal. That's a big pivot to make and an expansion of portfolio, but she left out that part of the reason why they did this is because Maggie's a successful photographer who's been published in the New York Times, the New Yorker. Publishers didn't want to publish this book. So that's also why it was done. So I think it's really...
She was told that birth was too niche.
Oh my.
Yeah. So I just wanted to offer that context and also show why independent media is very important, willing to take risks that other people are not, and to understand that what some people call niche is actually universal.
Natalia is so beautiful. It's really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
And also, in 2017, we were told the same. It took us 2.5 years to get a publisher for Designing Motherhood, and then it sold out within its first week.
Yeah.
The first printing went,
Incredible.
and let's make it happen for this too. In fact, it may have already. I don't know, but it should be flying off the shelves because it's amazing. And so, is there anything you want to share? Because your question is so good, Angela, about why you chose to do this.
I love
how you
that.
did it.
On the spot, that I prefer to be on this side of the conversation. But one thing I did want to mention, which I thought was sort of quite spectacular, was saying sort of about what struck you about the photos. And I can say that from when I first saw them and then engaged with Maggie, she was not a mother when she shot these images. And she was very badly wanting to be one.
Yeah.
And what was so beautiful was that while we were making the book, she gave birth to her daughter Charlotte,
So nice.
literally a month or 2 before it came out. And I thought it was so interesting to hear her shift about how she saw the photographs differently before and after having gone through this experience that she had documented on behalf of others, and how she ended up having an emergency cesarean, and she's sort of so she still has this sense of curiosity and about a different version. I mean, babies come into the world in so many different ways, but about how she had pictured or fantasized or whatever. And I just think that's so apparent in her work, is that there's a genuine curiosity, and there is sort of like a question mark behind everything, and there isn't that sort of need to force a narrative. It's sort of like everyone will take what they will take from these images, and I think that's of course what makes them so powerful, is that everyone finds something to latch on to. I hope you enjoy her work and investigate her work, and curious to see what she's working on next.
I mean, it did sort of become like a time capsule of home birth in the pandemic, but the basic starting point was, she didn't set out to make it this specifically. I was curious, and this is, when we spoke, I was like, oh, I felt very connected to her, because I feel like this is sort of why I wrote my book, where she was like, people give birth all the time, but I wanted to know, what does it feel like? What is it physically like? And she was like, and the way that I figured that out is by going and photographing it, you know? But so, you're right. That's like the very, very, the pulsing thing underneath is that very open curiosity. Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Michelle, I really liked what you said about having experienced birth and then thinking about
the perspective from a spectator or from a birth partner or from a birth worker, and how this, you have this very interior experience and this very, visceral experience, but then seeing it from this you know, seeing all the kind of like human scaffolding and like all of the kind of like scaffolding of the domestic space and all of the design objects around it, like how did that change for you, having just been through, you know?
Yeah, no, and it may be different for everybody who has or has not gone through it. It's so interesting. I think I knew that, but it's really nice to be reminded that Maggie hadn't birthed before she came to this work. Although, I mean, I was a nanny for 10 years. I feel like I had mothered, but I definitely had not given birth before giving birth recently. I still don't equate necessarily looking at these photographs with my own experience, because maybe because I'm an art historian, and so I've looked at so many images for so long that I see them in a historical continuum rather than in my own personal experience. And yeah, maybe it really was, I felt very much the same as my sister. She said that she was looking at her partner's face and it was horror. He was so shocked because there was so much blood, and she was like, oh! And she was like, I feel fucking fantastic. And she had a shot of Novocaine or whatever. But she said, I felt like 180 from what his face was giving me, and I had to say, stop blooming, like go away, like I want to enjoy it without reading this, because he was watching it and I was feeling it. And so I told that to my husband before we got to hospital. My version of safety was being at this very nice Scottish hospital in near Providence, and I said, no looming, like no looming, like I don't want to, if your face, if you're going to faint, like whatever's going to happen, like, I don't want to see it, like. And indeed I didn't really look at him. I buried my head in his shoulder, and so I was really able just to shut everything out, and I liked it not being visual, because so much of my life is spent looking at visual things and reading visually. But because I trade in visual images, I come back to what you say, Gabriella. I know their power of representation, and they change people's lives. They really do, for the better and for the worse. You definitely have images out there, painted, photographed, otherwise, that have done quite the opposite. But they really can be vehicles to what you were saying, Angela. This is for me. What else is for me? And so, these are not. I don't find the personal in these for me. I find the political, which I love. But yeah, thank you for the question. Okay, should we all buy Maggie's book?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you again.
Just wanna
Yeah,
hurry
thank you.